So, I want to talk a bit about the point of this meditation and why we do it. This evening I arrived here and was informed that a person that Rochelle and I, and maybe Sasha knows, had committed suicide in the last few days. Do you know Bill Sheffel, Sasha? Bill Sheffel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no. You lived in
Crestone, Colorado. Yeah. And he committed suicide. People commit suicide when they get lost in very despairing and depressed and unhappy thoughts. And they're looking for a way out of the pain of those thoughts. What meditation practice, the kind of practice that we're doing is about, you see, is about shifting one's allegiance from thought, which is full of suffering of all kinds, more or less. Even when it's happy, there's that edge of suffering, like, I'm happy, but how long will it last? You know? And you're sort of, as you give your loyalty to thoughts when they're good, your loyalty will be with them when they're bad too. And people kill themselves when they really get lost in very depressed, self-attacking thoughts. And they're looking for a way out of the pain of those thoughts. The kind of meditation practice that we're doing here is really shifting our loyalty from the thoughts, these mental events that occur in our mind, to that basic underlying awareness. You see, we think when we come to the practice of meditation that we are defined by our thoughts. We hardly even notice that we're thinking all the time. As we think as we walk down the street, we're so lost in them. And those thoughts describe us, me and my problems, me and my virtues, me and my failings, me and my opportunities, me and my failures. And we think that's who we are. But those thoughts have a twofold quality. On the one hand, they're completely transitory. They come and go like that. They're constantly appearing and disappearing. And when they repeat, it's always with some slight variation. Never exactly the same. The other quality they have is that they are fundamentally not true. They're not true because while they may hold a grain of truth, they purport to hold a much bigger, maybe even the whole truth, and they don't. We think that we can define ourselves or define other people with our thoughts, but all we're doing is taking one little sliver and focusing on that. And meanwhile, there's this huge panoply of detail that we've ignored about ourselves, about the world, about others. And because we're ignoring so much those thoughts, and we take them to be really real, they fundamentally are utterly deceptive. So they have this twofold quality of being basically deceptive and untrue, and being completely transitory. Thoughts just come and go. One minute you're having an up thought, the next minute you're having a down thought. One minute you think, oh, I'm so unattractive. Nobody will ever find me attractive. And the next minute somebody comes up to you and says, you look great. And you think, are they telling the truth? Are they not telling the truth? I mean, our thoughts just are constantly leading us into these funny kind of dilemmas. So they have this twofold quality of being unreliable, untrustworthy, maybe even fictional or untruthful, and transitory, as opposed to the basic awareness that we never can shut off. That's who we actually are. There's this constant presentation going on in the present moment of Joe and Anna. Is it Anna? Right? And Maria. And it says we are constantly thinking that we know who we are, and we're thinking we're doing this and that. But meanwhile, we're demonstrating ourselves in all of our unique qualities. Like you can't stop it. Joe is uniquely Joe. And boy, he's so one of a kind. And so is Anna. All of us. It's like we're snowflakes. And we're just what's the word? Shining our qualities continually, all the time, in this present moment. And the world is too. And that is the true nature of who we really are, this open space of awareness, with sounds and sights and smells and touches, all these things coming and going in it. That's called, it's given a number of names, that open space. In different contexts. I'm working with a teacher right now, a book, we are up in Westchester, and he calls it primordial mind, this open space. Or you could call it primordial awareness. It's primordial or pristine, pure, because it's always here. It's always now. There's always a space, even in your dreams. It's always now, it's always this space. The contents of this space and this moment come and go continually. They never stay the same, even for an instant. And they're what's so transitory. But the space itself, the space which is lit by knowingness, everything that appears in it is known. And it's always in this present moment in time. And that doesn't come and go. That is this pristine mind. And so really what meditation is about switching our allegiance from our thoughts back to pristine mind. When we begin to relax into this open space of awareness, there's a kind of happiness. It's not like giddy happiness, but it's fundamental well-being. This space is lit with well-being. It's lit with a kind of compassion, not a feeling sorry for. That's not what compassion is about at this level. Compassion is about participating in and feeling the beauty of this world as it arises and passes away in the space of this present moment. So there's enormous clarity as things arise and pass away in this space, and there's heat. There's a kind of beauty, a warmth to it. And those two things are called wisdom and compassion in the Buddhist terminology. And that's what we're beginning to give our allegiance to. We're coming back from thought again and again to this open space. We're switching our allegiance. And in doing that, once we begin to learn that that's the path, then we really begin to tread the path towards enlightenment or awakening. Enlightenment's a funny word for it. What the word really in Sanskrit is bodhi, which means awake. Awake from what? Awake from the dreams of thought. Now, when a person commits suicide, as our friend Bill Sheffel did, he's become totally lost and mired in thought. It's easy to do. You can become so depressed, and you can just, it's so self-attacking. It's very sad. But it's really such a shame, because thought is so fickle and untrustworthy. And when we become lost in those kind of depressions, it's just momentary, and it passes sooner or later. It may take a day, it may take an hour, it may take years, but it always passes. Our style of thinking changes over time. So really what our path is to shift our allegiance. And I'll just say one last thing about suicide. When I first met Trungpa Rinpoche, this was about 1971, a little after we had met. And I was in Colorado with him, and there was a member of one of his people who came to study with him, young fellow. Yeah, that's easy to say now, right? I'm 73. We were like 25 then. And this guy's name was Tom O'Leary, and he was blonde and blue-eyed. And he killed himself. Took pills. And I remember his parents came. I was sort of in charge of handling the details, calling the police, getting the hospital. The parents came from out of town, took the body. And then we had a service for him, as it were. It was winter. And I remember we was in a field north of Boulder. This was in Boulder, Colorado. And we were out in this gray field on a gray day, and it was cold. And there was an oil drum, and somebody lit a fire in the oil drum. And we were standing around shivering, and Trungpa Rinpoche started speaking. And the first words he said were, "Just about now, Tom is discovering that he didn't get out of anything." See, Buddhism says death is just another big change. And the mind, which is always changing, right? You can never find anything that lasts. That's what our minds are, is continual process of change. But it continues on. There's a kind of continuity within the change. You can't look at one thing and say that lasts. But it's like a river flowing. And when you die, you have a big change. You lose your body. You lose the physical world. But the intentionality and the knowingness of mind and thought continues. And so he said, just about now, Tom's discovering he didn't get out of anything. And in moments of depression, that always comes to me, if ever I think of suicide as an option, not a good idea. In Buddhism, it's regarded as the most heinous, in fact, all religions, is the worst crime of all that you can commit, suicide. The reason is that if you commit murder, you just kill one person. But when you kill yourself, it's an act of aggression against the whole world. You're rejecting the whole world. So, we do this practice. It's the path to sanity, shifting our allegiance from our thoughts, those mental events, those pesky little mental events, to this open, core, fundamental awareness, in which thoughts can still occur. They arise and they pass away, but we don't have to give them our allegiance, and certainly not to the point of becoming depressed and actually committing an act of violence against ourselves or someone else. So there'll be funeral services for our friend Bill Sheffel, who committed suicide. They're called sukhavati's in the Buddhist tradition. And we'll be trying to, in those services, send him our good wishes and our love and our reassurance that he can relax and that he doesn't have to be hard on himself and that he can have confidence in his journey if that's possible. That's what we'll be wanting for him. That's what a Buddhist does when somebody dies, is you send them confidence and good cheer, happiness. There's no weeping and wailing around the body because you don't want to give the dead person the feeling that there's something to be sorrowful about. And I did this with my parents. I talked to them after they had died. You stay with the body for 3 days and talk to them, and many of us have done this. I remember my mother, when my father died, my mother was in talking with my father, and who had passed away. And he came out and she said to my brother, "I've been talking with your father." And he said, "That's okay, as long as he isn't talking back." But he might have been, and who knows where he was. He could have been. I swear, I've done this a number of times with people, that I've sat with the bodies for the prescribed 3 days. I'm sure Rochelle has done it, and Sasha, right? And I swear, I don't know if it's my imagination, but I swear that at the end of those 3 days, it's as though the room goes suddenly cold. It seems colder, as though a light went out, and it got dimmer. As though the person's awareness had just left the body. That's why you stay with them, is because it tends to hang around the body. And another important thing you're doing when a person dies is you're telling them you're dead. Because people can get confused and not realize that they've died. And that's very frightening and unhappy, because they can see their loved ones and they can't communicate with them. They're trying to communicate and the loved ones don't respond, or don't respond appropriately. So it can be very disorienting and frightening. So your job as a survivor is to tell the person, "You're dead now, everything's fine, we're okay, you don't have to worry about us, we want you to be happy." And that's what we'll be doing for Bill Sheffel, because he's got a particularly hard task, having committed an act of violence against himself. So that's all I have to say about all of that cheery stuff. And if there are any questions or comments, Maria.
So when people die, and they need you to help to figure out if they are really dead or not, and
Sometimes.
Sometimes. But is there any way that they try to communicate with their loved ones through dreams?
Yes, through dreams and other ways too. That's what ghosts are. Ghosts, you see, are people who don't realize that they're dead and need to move on. And they're still trying to communicate with the living. And my teacher often exorcised ghosts. And what it amounted to, he said, is telling them, "You're dead. Move on." Because they don't realize it. And they're very unhappy because they're trying to communicate with their loved ones. So that's the Buddhist theory. You can believe it or not. I don't know what to exactly make of ghosts. I've never encountered a ghost. But I believe so much. To me it makes complete sense, the idea. See, I've studied a lot about the idea that there's rebirth. There's no thing that's reborn, no unchanging essence. It's just that there's this continual process of change that continues on. And so in the Bardo teachings, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is actually a very hard way into those teachings, there are other more accessible texts. It describes there are 3 bardos of death. A bardo is an interval. A bardo literally means from to. That's what bardo means. Bar is from, do is to. So it's from this point, there's the bardo of this meeting here. We walked in the door, that was the beginning. We'll walk out the door, that'll be the end. That's the bardo. So there are 3 bardos of death. The first one is what's called the painful bardo of dying. And that describes the process of dying. And it's the falling away of the body's shutting down, and it goes through it in 4 stages relating to the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air. It goes earth, fire, water, and air, in that order. And so with the first stage, the stage of earth, the body becomes very heavy and leaden, and you can't move. And then it goes through these different, and there are descriptions of these stages and what the person sees. They have visions, hallucinations at each stage. And then at the very end of the painful bardo of dying, when the body is completely shut down, then the mind begins to go through some changes. And it sort of, it starts, the thoughts of passion and the thoughts of aggression meet in the center of the central channel in the body where there are thoughts of ignorance. Those are the three poisons, they're called. And at some point the mind absolutely stops. And then it starts up again. It just stops for a split second. People who've trained and done a lot of meditation, like in that pause that we do at the end, if you've really done a lot of that, it's possible, they say, to achieve enlightenment, to wake up altogether from the dream of self in that moment when all those thoughts meet in the central channel. But then, if they don't, then they start to get going again. It's like a machine sort of kicking up like this again. And then you go through two more bardas, which end in rebirth. I mean, rebirth is just another change. It's like, you go home and put on your night clothes and you're reborn as a person who's going to sleep. And then you go to sleep, and in the morning you wake up and you're reborn as a person who's getting up and going and doing their day. Well, that's what happens when we take rebirth as human beings, or whatever we take rebirth as.
But we don't carry our memories, right?
Sometimes you do. And memories are hard to keep. But they say that especially young children often can remember elements of their previous lives. And so in Tibet, you see, the idea was that the Dalai Lama, let's take the Dalai Lama, he is the 14th in his line. And the idea is that a person achieves enlightenment and passes away and comes back again for the benefit of sentient beings, to help them get enlightened. That's the theory. I think of it as like coming back to continue the conversation. Like he was really having a good time, with all of his students, and he just wants to keep it going and help them and loves them. And when he comes back, especially enlightened people, their students, this is typical, will want some kind of confirmation. Is this guy that I've identified as being the 15th Dalai Lama, is he really the Dalai Lama? Or is he somebody we made a mistake, got the wrong baby? So what they do is they encourage that child. First of all, when they so-called discover it, see, a high Lama will have a vision. And he'll say, okay, the next Dalai Lama is to be found in a village, and there'll be a house with a red door and a couple with a baby, and they've got a black dog. And then he sends his representatives to go to that village, and they find the house, and they find the dog, and the couple, and the baby. And then they apply tests. And the tests are that they put objects in front of the infant. Some that belong to the previous incarnation, and some that didn't. And they watch which one the infant gravitates towards. And then they bring people and show them to the child, or however old the child may be more than an infant. And again, they're looking for the infant to gravitate towards the people who are known to the previous incarnation. But even that isn't enough. And Trungpa Rinpoche, my teacher, described how during his childhood, his monks were always trying to encourage him to remember previous lives and to remember things from previous lives. And once in a while he did, And they were very happy with this. They'd get really excited if he remembered something about a previous life that they knew about, that they were there for. And he said, but as he grew up, he could have cared less about it, and he just forgot it, the whole thing. Some people don't, though. But most of us, you see, because, A, we're not that accomplished in awareness practice, and B, we're not being encouraged, to remember anything. So we don't pay any attention to it, and it just, as we grow older, it just gets submerged. Usually by the time you're 6 or 7, there's no hope of bringing that forward again. Except in maybe some really extraordinary circumstances. I mean, there are people who say they're psychics and can remember previous lives. What was that, Annie Laurie? This famous person who remembered her previous lives? Yes, Rochelle.
think sometimes certain situations bring up memories. Or if you go to a certain place, like when I went to Nepal, it brought up some memories for me of just being in a country where it was a very spiritual place, where the Buddha was born, and I just really took to that place. Whereas sometimes you go to other places and you have no connection at all. But one of the memories I had when I was about maybe 7 or 8, I remember just passing by the living room, and there was no one in the room, and the TV was on. It was on the news. It was black and white. I don't think it was color. And I saw this group of people walking down a big mountain. Just a whole line of people walking down a big mountain. And the commentator was saying, the Tibetans are leaving, they're leaving Tibet because of the Chinese invasion, and they're walking into India. And it was like all of a sudden, time stood still, and I was just this little kid alone in this living room in a kind of a time warp. And I was transfixed watching this event. And I was just living in New York, never heard of Tibetans. I didn't know anything about this, but I just was struck by the way these people looked and what was going on. And then, obviously, years later, that scene became very prominent in my life because my teacher was one of the people leaving Tibet at the time. And, Trungpa Rinpoche and a lot of the teachers that I studied with. Anyway, I think certain situations bring up memories of familiarity that inspire us, or, I don't know, we make connections to, let's say.
One.
I have lots of dreams that has nothing to do with myself, and I was just wondering, because usually dreams are interpreted as like a wish fulfillment or thing that you encounter, that there are things that I encounter in the daytime and they will come into my dream at night. But there are a lot of dreams that absolutely have nothing to do with me. So I was wondering, where did that come from? I mean, was it the past life, or was it, because I would be dreaming myself as somebody else, and something happened, So how do you, how do you know it is just random or it is past life memory?
I haven't got a clue.
Okay.
That's beyond me, I'm afraid. Here. Sarah.
I just wanted to ask if you have any ideas about how, sanghas heal after events like that. I mean, how we can help each other. I mean, I have another community where we lost someone to cancer. I know it's not the same thing, but, and I've lost, people, I've known people who have committed suicide before, but I guess for me, I feel like I want to leap into action and, always trying to figure out what can you do to help, because it affects so many people.
Yeah. Well, if the people, one thing, there are grieving groups, and the idea is that people don't have to keep it bottled up, that they can share it with other people. And in doing that, it's like a thought. You can free yourself from the grief. The grief is a dream by bringing it conscious, bringing it forward, making it sharing it with other people who are open to hearing it. And it can bring you together as well as free you from the fear and the sorrow of those thoughts. The key is that the people who are involved in that kind of a group have to be willing to simply open and show what's going on inside of them and not make any kind of judgmental or manipulative comments towards the other people, not trying to calm them, soothe them, help them get rid of it, but just being there in an open way, because people know when they're being manipulated, and you want to avoid any kind of manipulation. So the leaders of those kind of grief groups, that's what they're doing. They're helping people avoid, trying to make it all right, to soothe somebody, and just helping the people to speak their minds and their hearts and to share that. And that can free people.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps we ought to end. This got very serious at the end here. Well, it's because of the idea of the Bill. It's always very shocking when somebody does that, isn't it? It's such a statement of rejection.
Just a word about Bill. I first met him in 1975. I was living in Santa Cruz, California, and we had a small Dharma study group there. Tripurupche was our teacher. And in walks Bill, and he was 17 years old, I think. And he was going to school in Santa Cruz. And he was just a very tall, thin, blonde boy, and he was just so sweet, so nice, and very bright. And then I just saw him rise up, and he was a poet and an artist. And I saw him rise up within, the Sangha, and became very active as a meditation instructor and Shambhala training. And so and he had a really wonderful son. And so I was just very, very heartbroken to hear today that he was in such despair that this is what happened. I mean, I can't even believe it, because I haven't seen him in a while, but he was an amazing person. So that kind of thing, I think you just never know what's going to happen in life. I mean, if you would have asked me then that this is how he would come to his end, I would have thought it was ridiculous and never would have believed it. So, I don't know. And then the first thing, a friend of mine called me on the phone, and she told me about it. That's how I found out. So immediately on the phone, we started doing some practices together. I lit incense on my on the windowsill of my living room. Outside the windowsill, I light incense and did something called a lasso, which is a fire offering with juniper, and we said prayers for him and dedicated the merit. So this is what we did immediately to help him with his on his journey. And when I think it's very important as meditators and practitioners that when these things happen, immediately, it's really helpful if we can immediately practice for that person, meditate, or whatever we do in a spiritual way to connect to them and send them healing, loving energy. So.
Okay. So I think we're going to end here. And if we can just end with a bow.